I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Bronwyn Schweigerdt, public speaker, author, licensed psychotherapist, and podcaster. Please enjoy Bronwyn Schweigerdt. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I am here with Bronwyn Schweigerdt, public speaker, author, licensed psychotherapist, and podcaster. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mari.
I am very excited to chat with you about creativity. I know you have some unique perspective and experience with creativity and the work that you do. But before we get into that, if you wouldn't mind letting our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I like to say licensed psychotherapist because my clients are all individuals and that title sounds like they're all like family. So it can be a little misleading. And I have a podcast called Angry at the Right Things, which I started as my passion project just to really get out the principles that I'm helping my clients with to people who will never be my clients. And a lot of it's about anger because I really have come to see that anger is the most misunderstood principle, emotion, experience in like all of human history and even within the therapeutic community, honestly. So I really have a strong emphasis on anger, and I really believe I should say suppressed anger is at the heart of pretty much all mental illness. And I have found that to be true with my own journey, with my clients, as well as like physical ailments. In my previous career, I was in nutrition. So I could say that with a lot of knowledge, that suppressed anger really makes us sick in many, many ways. So that's kind of my focus there.
Nice. Yeah. I love the podcasting passion project. This is mine as well. So I definitely relate on that level to it. Yeah. Well, I mean, in talking about anger and the experience of suppressed anger, I wonder for listeners who may not have a deep understanding of the anger emotion or what suppressing anger is, if you wouldn't mind giving a little rundown so listeners have a little more context.
Yeah, so I use the word suppress, but I mean, I think technically the better term would be disassociated anger.
Okay.
And, I've really come to believe that even though anger is invisible, it's more real than this chair I'm sitting on right now. Like it is so real. And it doesn't just evaporate. It doesn't just, dissipate into the ether. It stores up in our bodies if we don't channel it out in healthy ways, in responsible ways. So most people, associate anger with like being explosive or violent or verbally violent. And that's unfortunate because channeling anger out of our body in a healthy way could just be something like saying, me saying, hey, Mari, when you say that, it's not okay. That's kind of a condescending tone you're using. And I don't feel comfortable with that. So just being assertive and having boundaries and then bringing about accountability. So those are kind of the three ways that we can channel anger out of our bodies. And there's this weird thing where people think of, like I said, the explosive piece of anger as aggressive, which it is aggressive. And then they kind of go, well, I'm not angry. And then they're passive or they're passive aggressive. And there's like this healthy place in the middle called assertiveness that no one seems to know about. And it really literally gives us back our lives, like
Mm,
literally. And my own experience with I've had several major depressive episodes.
hmm.
That's how I got into this career, actually. This was my second career, like I said. I
Yeah.
didn't go looking for it. I actually fell into a depression so profound. I was physically sick. I was involuntarily vomiting at random times, like
Hmm.
while walking down the street, while driving a car on a freeway. It was
Yeah.
horrible, humiliating too. And I thought I was going crazy. And
Mm,
looking back in retrospect, my depressive episodes, so I had about three really big ones over the
hmm.
course of 10 years. They were all from my own disassociated anger
Hmm.
at people in my life who I felt very betrayed by, but
Hmm.
I wasn't aware of it, or I didn't feel entitled
Hmm.
to be angry and say, you know what? I need more from you right now. And I'm feeling,
Yeah.
kind of emotionally abandoned, or, hey boss, I I'm going to give you an ultimatum. If you don't allow me to do things the way I feel should be done for myself, I'm going to go
Hmm.
somewhere else. So because I didn't do those things, I lost myself, because when
Hmm.
we get depressed, we lose ourselves. And um, so yeah, that's kind of basically some of the principles.
Thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate the specification or explanation around dissociative anger and how yeah, how it does impact more than just our mental health, our physical health as well. And how when we start paying attention to our emotions, how we can use creativity to help our assertiveness, our agency,
Yeah.
how we communicate, and the effectiveness that we show up in our life. So thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, since we're talking about creativity today a bit, I'm curious, what does it mean to you to be creative?
Yeah. So I think in my line of work, as a therapist, I'm always learning. And you know what? I will just disclaimer here. The reason I became a therapist was I was so depressed. I went to multiple therapists, and I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I'm hardly functioning right now, but I still think I might make a better therapist than this person. And unfortunately, that was true for like almost everyone I went to.
Mm,
Um, so I don't want to say, that therapists are always learning, because that, unfortunately, I wish that were the case, but a good therapist is always learning, because you're listening, and when you're
mhm.
listening, you're learning.
Yeah.
And so, kind of making associations, making connections. I think for me, that's how I view the creative act. For me, is just like, a lot of metaphor imagery in my mind, making connections, kind of filling, connecting dots. And that is very empowering, because then I can see things. I have a better paradigm for viewing
Mhm.
things. And it, empowers people. And I think that's just like an ongoing thing. So I think listening, even if you're not a therapist, I think just being a listener, whether, just a listener of life, like when people are talking,
Mm,
you're really, really listening, like you're really paying attention. Or you're reading. You can read books, but you can also just read, like, for example, I have pets. I have four pets right now. And just kind of even reading them, like, oh, I'm noticing, like, when I when I pet them all, and I try to give them all the appropriate amount of petting each day, they become friends, and they become friendly, and they're not like competing with each other anymore. So I think we can always be listening and reading everything,
mhm.
or like gardening. You kind of learn, oh, this plant really likes the sun. This plant really likes the shade. And you're getting to know whatever it is in your life around you. And you're making these connections because you're paying attention. So that's kind of how I see creativity.
I love that. I love the idea of really listening, like intentional listening and paying attention for people who might struggle paying attention, or we live in a society currently that has a lot of distractions in it.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you orient towards listening or paying attention when there are so many distractions or other
Yeah.
things to pay attention to?
I'm pretty good at like, I think I'm a natural minimalist. So like I
Mm.
honestly, and saying that, a lot of people, they like the distractions. They use
Mhm.
those distractions as another form to dissociate from feelings
Right.
that they don't want to feel. So, right now in my life, I should say, I'm totally fine with no distractions because I'm feeling good because I
Mhm.
am, you know, working on myself therapeutically. That has not always been the case, but I think
Mhm.
the more we're at peace internally, we we create that in our lives, and I see that. So my first career, I think I said, was nutrition. Um, I used to really believe like, oh, if people just change their diets, like they're gonna be healthy. I don't understand why they don't. Don't understand why it's so hard to make these really small basic changes, whatever. And I have a good friend who right now is still in the dietetics career, and I told her, I just realized that when people start feeling good inside, internally,
Mhm.
they come to me the next session and they're like, I started working out. I started shopping at the farmer's market and like making recipe lists. And they do it on their own. And I really have found that to be true, that
Mhm.
when we have this homeostasis internally, we feel alive, we feel this peace, and we create peaceful lives for
Mhm.
ourselves. It's like we want
Mhm.
to create those oases for ourselves, like gardening or a cleaner house. Like and a lot of therapists put the cart before the horse. They're like, well, you're depressed. So have you exercised? Have you gone for walks? Have you tried gardening? And it's like that might work for a week when you're depressed, but you're putting the cart before the horse.
Mhm. Yeah, so really it comes back to listening. Is the therapist really listening to what the client is saying about their experience and what they're going through and how to work with what is present in that moment? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of therapists, I mean, if they're doing that, because that's like called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, um, they're not listening because that's not a listening kind of therapeutic modality. Honestly, they listen for like 10, 15 minutes and then they're telling you what to do. And it's like, oh my
Mhm.
God, I could have Googled those things. Thank you very much. Like the reason we come to a human is to be a human, and you can listen and you can learn and you can understand. And I can't get that from Google. So I really need you
Mm.
to be a human right now and try to listen with the goal of understanding, not listening with the goal of fixing me. Like
Sure.
I have a I have a husband for that. I don't need that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious in your life and in your experience with your own creativity, what's your earliest memory of being creative?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean I kids are pretty creative naturally. But I know I felt this is kind of a little not like, yeah. So I felt the most alive, and I kind of put creativity with feeling alive
Yeah.
together. Um, when I was like 3 years old, our family moved to Switzerland for 4 or 5 months. My dad was on sabbatical there,
Mhm.
and I was from Ohio, and so even though I was three, I those are like my first memories because I remember like
Mm.
seeing these beautiful mountains and
Mhm.
the green, and then I would go out to the playground. And in Europe, even today, because we were there last year, they put their playgrounds just on grass. I don't know why in the United States we have too many liability issues, like no grass, but and it's really like it's a very like comforting
Mhm.
experience. And so I just remember being out on the playground on the swings, just it was green, there were mountains, and just like swinging, and I felt so alive. I just felt so, so alive. And I think, later when we moved back, I started getting into gymnastics, and I think my
Mhm.
body just knew it felt good and it felt very alive to be moving a lot. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why like I've always um, been like into running or swimming or, I was in gymnastics for a long time. I think that just kind of was a body memory for me. And I love being outside. I think that's where all that was picked up.
Nice. And was this something that your parents like really cultivated, or was this just something that you've kind of brought with you into adulthood? The joy of movement or feeling
Hmm.
that aliveness, being
Yeah.
outside and
Yeah, I think that was just something I did. No, they did not cultivate it. I remember watching TV. I don't know if people in their 50s can relate, but watching TV for like 5 hours a day as a kid after school. But I couldn't just watch TV. So I just would do gymnastics like
Mm.
while I watched TV, like the whole time, Thank
Yeah.
God I did. And yeah, so I think it was just something in me that might be, labeled as ADD back or ADHD today, but like
Mhm.
my body just had to be moving. I couldn't just sit there. So thank God.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like even in your life today, movement is a very big outlet for you for aliveness and expression, or at least that's the story that I'm hearing as
Yeah.
you're talking.
I mean, I will say I've had some epiphanies, especially like when I'm running.
Mm.
I don't work out like indoors. I hate gyms so much. But outdoors, I think there's something about being outside and moving quickly.
Hmm.
And then I'll listen to music or podcasts, but my brain just feels very stimulated. And I'll have like sometimes just like this full on epiphany at a stoplight. Like it's crazy. So I think there's something to that. And then I think just like sometimes I'll break out between clients and I'll just turn up the music and like dance. And that feels, you know, I feel alive and no one's watching. Thank God.
Right.
I don't want to be doing, I just think, I mean, honestly, this sounds so bad, but I just feel sorry for people who like dance and do gymnastics or whatever to be graded or to,
Mm.
as performance if they're not really doing it for themselves, if they're not showing up for themselves. Like,
Hmm.
I think even if I were a performer, a dancer, which I never would be because I'm not coordinated enough to do that, but I hope I would just have my eyes closed and I would just be doing it for me. And I think
Hmm.
that we can't allow, you know, other people's judgments or trying to win the approval or a grade or whatever to take away from what feels good for us, what makes us feel alive.
Hmm. Yeah, that brings you joy, then
Yeah.
does it really matter that someone is or is not critiquing or grading?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you strike me as someone who has had inspiration in their life from various experiences, but in your life today, who or what brings inspiration?
Yeah. Um, so I think, my clients bring a lot of inspiration. And I will say that I really, so those years for me of being, going through those major depressive episodes,
Hmm.
I would not repeat them, for $1 billion. But in retrospect, I thank God for them. And
Mm.
I really see now, I view every painful experience, every bit of suffering as a double-edged sword, as bittersweet.
Mm.
And I really don't think there's anything in life that's not bittersweet. I think
Mm.
there's no blessing without a curse, and there's no curse without a blessing. Like I really see everything having that. And
Hmm.
so I think that inspires me too, is like, especially working with my clients and seeing how, yes, they're going through something very painful, but it also is this amazing opportunity to like unlearn a
Mm.
whole lot of BS that
Hmm.
they never knew was there
Hmm.
and become kind of like a new person. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious in the how did you get to that point of being able to see the double-edged sword, see the blessing within the challenge or the curse
Yeah,
and vice
yeah,
versa. Like, what was that journey for you?
yeah. I don't know exactly like when it really became super explicit for me. I know for myself, um, yeah, so my brain really was shut down, for years. And I was like, I just feel like the stupidest person. I actually like was let go from a couple jobs because I
Mhm.
wasn't really functioning because of my
Mhm.
depression. And I just was like, yeah, my brain's not working. It's really hard. It's humiliating. But looking back, like, I guess it kind of was. I just didn't know it. Like, I guess things
Mm,
were still like making
yeah.
connections and input really was sticking. And when I finally came out of my last depressive episode, and I did a lot of work on myself around that time, it was like it was like a rebirth. It was
Mm,
crazy. And all of a sudden my brain was like not restored. It was like a different brain. And I like
mm.
was putting all these things together. And my husband's just like, who are you? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm Bronwyn 2.0. Like this is crazy. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's kind of a mystery, but I see it with my clients too. It's like
Mhm.
it's this awakening. It's almost like a rebirth. And if you've been through a birth, my birth with my daughter 20 years ago, it was unmedicated. It was a home birth.
Mhm.
It's a very messy and very painful process if you don't use any medication. And even if you do, it's still painful and messy.
Yeah.
But like, it's the only way to be born, and I think
Mm.
rebirth is the same way. Like, it's a,
Mhm.
it's a, it's bittersweet. It's a mix.
Yeah. It is a bit of a mess to be reborn and to put the pieces back together
Mhm.
in a new formation to reawaken or awaken for the first time
Yeah,
experiences and parts of yourself. And
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So, in being a psychotherapist and working with the multitudes of people that you do, I imagine you come across people who don't believe they can change or don't believe that, you know, they will ever feel normal or like how they compare themselves to other people. And similar in the world of creativity, people feeling like,
yeah.
oh, I'm not creative at all. Don't have a creative bone in my body. How would you encourage others to find creativity in their life or find that belief that change is possible?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer that we all have like a blueprint inside of us that we
Mm,
are designed to do, and when we find that thing, and I didn't find it until, the last few years, and I'm 53.
mhm.
Um, so there's no rush. I tell my daughter who's 20, I'm like, take your time, figure it out. Like life is a journey to be learning. It's a learn by doing
Yeah.
process, and there's no rush. So yeah, just like bloom where you're planted. I really mean that. Like I believe we will naturally gravitate towards the things where our natural curiosities are, whatever that, we all have these unique curiosities, these unique passions, these unique maybe talents where we just see things differently or we do things
Mhm.
differently. What makes us unique that we just feel pull towards or just feels makes us feel alive, when we do those
Mm.
things or when we hear of those things or when we think of those things. So I would just do that intuitively and just trust yourself.
Yeah, that trusting yourself is a big piece. And the the balance of, how do you trust yourself and trusting yourself is, I think, for sure can be the double-edged, I think for a lot of people in that experience of questioning, do I trust myself and trusting yourself at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think we were conditioned as children usually to not trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes hand in hand with doing things for the approval,
Mm-hmm.
to make our parents happy or at least placate their anger or whatever.
Sure.
And we lose ourselves when we are conditioned in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
we learn to trust other people's judgments or critiques, and we stop trusting ourselves. And so it's really a matter of coming back to ourselves. And I call that like self attunement,
Mm-hmm.
just attuning, like, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
Is my feelings matter. What am I feeling?
Mm-hmm.
And our feelings tell us what we need. So am I feeling kind of resentful? Well, then I guess I need like to have a boundary right now with
Mm-hmm.
this situation. And so I think it just comes back to, how do I feel? What does this feel like?
Mm-hmm.
Do I feel uncomfortable? Well, I guess I need a boundary for that too, or I need assertiveness to say, hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable with how you're talking to me. But it's really starts with self attunement and really connecting to ourselves and healing our relationship with ourselves.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I just have one last question.
Yeah.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Mm. Yeah. It just feels like you're alive and it's so addictive.
Mm. I love it. Thank you for that. Yeah. If people want to learn more about the work you do, your podcast, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah. So my podcast is Angry at the Right Things,
Mhm.
and it's found wherever you find your podcasts. Subscribe to your podcast.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, I'll put a link to that in show notes so people have easy access. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too, Mari.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.